Remember all those theories about how Dragon would be the one who fights Imu and the Five Elders, while Luffy would defeat Akainu? And not even Luffy. Some fans actually thought that it would be Sabo who fights Akainu. Well, of course, nothing is confirmed yet, but you also don't need me to tell you that the Revolutionary Army stocks are at an all-time low. The Kuma flashback is brilliant, and many fans believe it's the best flashback yet. But even though Dragon is in there, and the Revolutionary Army is also in there, what are they even doing? Yeah, in theory, they are liberating nations and amassing power so that they can eventually overthrow the Celestial Dragons. But it's clear that the story is just telling this to us and not showing it. Remember, characters usually aren't mocked for their actions. They're mocked when the story does not acknowledge them properly. This also brings to question a very common and understandable accusation. Is MonkeyDDragon a fraud? Well, let's talk about it. We're going to do a comprehensive introspection and just try to see if all the fraud allegations against Dragon are actually true or not. Though, before we get further into this video, I just want you to press that naughty like and subscribe button. It helps the channel grow, which is, of course, always appreciated. Just do it! And let the algorithm know that you like One Piece just as much as I do. Alright, so for starters, let's compare what the Straw Hat Pirates have done in comparison to the Revolutionary Army. Luffy has taken down 3 warlords and freed several nations. He made an absolute mockery out of the government's secret CP9, and just recently, he did what not even Whitebeard was willing to do. He destroyed Kaido and helped Wano in reclaiming sovereignty. This is obviously a very quick and basic summary of what Luffy has done for the world, but compare that to what Dragon has done. The Revolutionary Army wasn't even involved in whatever was going on in Alabasta. They had to change their base of operations because of the Blackbeard pirates. Sabo and the company were on Dressrosa, but the success ultimately attributes to Luffy and the Straw Hats. As far as the general story goes, we have only ever seen them make brief appearances. And while I'm sure they've saved a lot of nations, it all happened off screen. But this is not even about the Revolutionary Army, because just look at what Sabo's done recently. Not to mention how much of a help Ivankov was during Marineford, and even during Kuma's flashback. The Revolutionary Army is good. They even hosted Robin for 2 years. But what's Dragon done? Keep in mind that we are not talking about what he's done in theory. We're talking about the portrayal and the fact that the story hasn't even given us any feats, nor any sights of him being a genius revolutionary. Remember chapter 956? It's the big news chapter where several characters react to the news. Of course, at that time, we didn't know what the news was about, but considering their reactions, it sure did paint the picture that apparently Sabo is dead. The Dan, Makino, and the Revolutionary Army, including Dragon, were all freaking out. And what was the news? Well, as it later turned out in chapter 1054, the news was just about how Sabo apparently killed Cobra. Obviously he didn't, but you'd expect the Revolutionary Army to be more cautious of the government's propaganda. The fact that they were all freaking out just shows us how incompetent they are. And guess what Dragon said in chapter 1058? He said that if Sabo really killed Cobra, he wouldn't forgive him no matter what his reasons were. I mean, come on, you'd think that Dragon of all people would be more skeptical of the government's propaganda. And you'd also expect him to be more trusting of his own comrades. The fact that he reacted to that news by genuinely freaking out and then he says something like this? Yep, he's a hack. Luckily, Sabo told him in chapter 1060 that he wasn't the one who killed Cobra. Otherwise, Dragon would still be having sleepless nights. But it doesn't even matter if Sabo killed Cobra or not. After all, Dragon wasn't involved in Alabasta at all, even though he had already been introduced at that point. It was Luffy who liberated Alabasta from Crocodile and Baroque Works. Not to mention, what's with saying that you won't forgive him no matter what? Was Cobra's life really that precious to Dragon? Yep, this is why we haven't talked about the Kuma flashback yet. I just wanted to briefly go through why these fraud allegations didn't start with chapter 1098. They have always been there. What chapter 98 showed us is how inconsistent Dragon's character is. After Ginny was captured and taken away by a celestial dragon of people, the Revolutionary Army just kept on with their business, which questions the consistency of Dragon's character. On one hand, he was not going to forgive Sabo if he really killed Cobra, but on the other hand, he basically sacrificed Ginny because they didn't have what it takes. Again, it's not what he did, it's about the portrayal. If chapter 1098 also showed us the Revolutionary Army forming a plan to eventually take Ginny back from then, or even just a mere statement, it would have made at least some sense, but the story did not acknowledge it. Then you have Luffy and Garp, one of Dragon's sons. The other is his father. We all know what Luffy did when Robin was taken away, and also what Garp did when Kobe was abducted by Blackbeard. So not only is Dragon a bum, he's also a disgrace to the Monkey D bloodline. Is that right? Don't get me wrong though, I perfectly understand why the Revolutionary Army didn't try to take Ginny back. It was years ago, and back then, they weren't ready for war with the Celestial Dragons for just a single person. It wasn't worth it. And for the sake of argument, let's ignore how Kuma could have used his abilities to bring her back, especially because the security in Mary Joy's isn't exactly that impenetrable. I mean, in the Levelly arc, Sabo and the Revolutionaries, and then also Bonnie, they got through, didn't they? But yeah, for the sake of argument, let's ignore that there was a way to somehow rescue Ginny without destroying the Revolutionary Army. What we still have to talk about is the way the story has diminished Dragon's character. We have been blueballed again and again, but all we get is more incompetence? At this point, it's hard to believe that Dragon would defeat any top tier. Obviously, he'd be sidelined by Luffy. That's just how it is. But Dragon dies tomorrow and Sabo takes over, literally nothing is going to change. Sabo deserves more respect anyway. If Fisher Tiger was able to free slaves from Mary Jo's, the revolutionary armies would have very easily saved one person. Overall, the Revolutionary Army has spent decades amassing power and freeing kingdoms. They are obviously strong enough to be a threat, and we are definitely going to see them do something important, but in the context of the entire story, they have been background characters. You can't have a character who's always shown sitting on his ass just reading the newspaper and having inconsistent reactions, and still expect him to be treated with respect in the eyes of the reader. Now, of course, I'm interested in your thoughts as well, so let's continue this discussion in the comments section down below. The story is still far from over, and considering how Sabo has so easily grown on everyone, it's also possible for Dragon to redeem himself. We'll just have to wait and see, but let me know what you guys think because this is definitely an interesting conversation to have. And guys, remember to kick that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. It's always appreciated. Well then, I'll see y'all in the next video. John,